All right, so let me tell you, yes, I was scrolling through the news the other day, and I gotta say something really caught my eye. I mean, it was so weird. I had to stop and like reread the headline twice.
Oh, yeah. What was it?
Well, okay, get this. The United States just slapped tariffs on, wait for it, Heard Island and McDonald Islands.
Heard Island and Hyper. Those are the ones, what, way down in the Southern Ocean, right?
Yep, those are the ones, the places with like way more penguins than people.
Oh, okay. So this is about those tariffs that have everyone scratching their heads.
That's exactly it. It's kind of like imagine President Trump with a dartboard, right? And it's a world map.
Yeah, yeah.
And he just throws a dart, doesn't even look, and bam, wherever it lands, tariff.
Uh-huh. You're not wrong. It does seem kind of random.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to try and figure out today. Like, what in the world is going on here? Why are these islands, which are basically just like giant nature preserves, ending up on this U.S. tariff list? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's definitely a head scratcher. I mean, when you see places like Heard and McDonald Islands on there,
Yeah.
well, those places are more famous for their wildlife than for, bustling economies or anything.
Exactly. So we've got some articles here, CBC News and the National Post. They're both trying to make sense of it.
All right, so let's jump into it. What's the CBC saying?
Well, they basically start out just like everyone else, completely baffled. They even quote the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, who joked that now nowhere on Earth is safe.
Uh-huh. That's a good one. Nowhere on Earth is safe from tariffs, huh?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it is funny, but underneath the jokes, there's got to be some kind of logic here, right? Like, what's actually driving this?
Yeah, for sure. Let's look into that. So first off, the sheer remoteness of these places, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, I was reading that in the National Post, too.
Like, take Heard McDonald Islands again. They're smack dab in the middle of the sub-Antarctic, closer to Antarctica than to Australia even.
Yeah, and they're basically just these volcanic landscapes, right? Nothing much going on there.
Right. The Australian government says that Heard Island has only had something like 240 recorded human visits since the 1850s.
Wow.
And get this, McDonald Island has only had 2.
2? Seriously?
Yeah, 2.
Yeah.
That's it.
I mean, I've had more Uber Eats drivers at my door in the past month. It's crazy to think about.
It really puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And yet here we are, these practically untouched islands are facing a 10% tariff.
Yeah, CBC dug into some U.S. Census Bureau data and found that in 2024, imports from there were only like $13,590.
What? Seriously?
Seriously. And most of that was electrical equipment, computer programs, and transportation equipment. I mean, come on, who's buying stuff like that from essentially a penguin colony?
Yeah, that's where things start to get a little suspicious, right?
Right.
It's like, is there really some booming trade happening that we just don't know about?
Well, The Guardian and CBC picked up on this too. They suggested that maybe it's just a bunch of mislabeled shipments.
Ah, okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Right. Like in international trade, things get mixed up all the time. It's not unusual for stuff to be like accidentally attributed to the wrong place on the paperwork.
Yeah, that happens. So maybe it's not penguins buying laptops after all.
Exactly. Much more likely a paperwork snafu.
Makes sense.
And of course, the internet had a field day with this whole thing, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I bet.
I saw someone on X joking about tariffing the seagulls, and then you had like Scaramucci and Malinowski making cracks about penguins getting ripped off. It's all pretty hilarious, gotta admit.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny. But it also kind of highlights how ridiculous the whole situation is.
Totally.
CBC even talked to this guy, Mike Coffin, who's done a lot of research in the waters around these islands.
Okay, what do you have to say?
Well, he's super skeptical about there being any real exports from these places. He described them as like this pristine ecosystem, totally untouched by any outside plants or animals, let alone any serious human impact.
Wow, so truly untouched wilderness.
Yep. And it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, too, They're protected because of their biodiversity and scientific importance. Even the BBC chimed in, saying the last known human visit to Heard Island was just a quick stop in 2016 by some amateur radio enthusiasts.
So basically nobody's really going there, let alone exporting stuff.
Right. It just doesn't add up. This whole thing kind of makes you wonder about how good we are at tracking international trade data,
Yeah.
If we're getting these tiny, tiny numbers wrong, what about the bigger picture?
Yeah, good point.
Okay, so let's move on from the penguin paradise to another spot on the tariff list. The British Indian Ocean Territory.
Oh yeah, that one got a 10% tariff too, didn't it?
It did. But this one's a little different.
How so?
Well, CBC pointed out that while there are no permanent civilians living there, it's home to a big U.S. and U.K. military base on Diego Garcia.
Ah, okay, so that changes things.
It does. because pretty much all the economic activity there is about supporting that base. Yeah, CBC cited some U.S. Census Bureau data showing about $462,500 in imports in 2024, mostly computer and electronic products, and then livestock and livestock products, which, makes sense for a military base.
Right, got to keep those computers running and the troops fed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So even though it's remote, there's a clear human presence and economic activity directly tied to the base.
Okay, that one's less of a mystery then. But then you've got Norfolk Island, right?
Yeah, Norfolk Island. Population around 2,000, their economy is mostly tourism.
And they got hit with a 29% tariff, which seems kind of harsh, especially since they don't even export anything to the U.S., according to CBC.
Yeah, CBC interviewed the Norfolk Island administrator, George Plant, and he said they don't export to the U.S. and don't even have their own tariffs.
Wow, so they're getting hit with this huge tariff for basically no reason.
It seems that way. The U.S. import data shows about $191,000 in goods from Norfolk Island in 2024.
Okay, but is that actual stuff being imported?
Well, most of it is listed as goods returned, which usually means items that were initially exported and are now being sent back for, like repairs or replacements.
Oh,
So it's not really new imports. The rest is mainly transportation and computer equipment. But CBC did mention the CIA fact book, which says that Norfolk Island has a high-income economy based on tourism and some re-exportation.
so maybe some goods are passing through there.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
But a 29% tariff on what seems like mostly returned items from a place that doesn't directly export to the U.S., it's a bit much, don't you think?
Definitely seems out of proportion, like getting a speeding ticket on a road you never drove on.
Exactly. All right, ready for a trip to the Arctic?
Lead the way.
Okay, next up we have Svalbard and Jan Mayen, both facing a 10% tariff.
So remind me again, what are these places like?
Okay, so CBC says Jan Mayen is basically this barren island in the Arctic, just a few military and weather folks stationed there.
Okay.
Svalbard's a bit bigger. It's this Norwegian archipelago with just under 3,000 residents.
Okay, got it.
And the U.S. import figures for both of them combined are just under $42,000 in 2024, mostly non-electrical machinery and computer equipment.
Again, super tiny numbers.
Right. You start to wonder if someone just added an extra zero by mistake.
Maybe they did. Okay, so what about their economies? Are they actually exporting much?
Well, for Svalbard, CBC pulled some info from the CIA fact book, and it says their economy includes coal mining, tourism, research.
Mm.
Oh, and the Global Seed Vault, that's there too.
Oh, yeah, that's right. The Doomsday Vault for all the world's seeds.
Exactly. Jan Mayen historically had some seal hunters and trappers, but nothing substantial economically these days.
Gotcha. So again, it seems like the level of trade with the U.S. is minimal at best.
Definitely minimal.
Oh.
Right. Ready for our last stop on this whirlwind Tariff tour?
Uh-huh. Sure. Hit me.
This one's interesting. It's Tokelau.
Okay, Tokelau. Refresh my memory. What's that one?
So it's these 3 tiny tropical islands, a very small population. Their economy is mostly subsistence agriculture, meaning they grow food for themselves, some fishing, and they get a lot of financial support from New Zealand.
Oh, right. Okay. And they got hit with a 10% tariff, too.
They did. And their U.S. imports in 2024 were around $177,600, mostly classified under other special classification provisions. Not super helpful, I know.
No, not really. But what are they even exporting?
Well, CBC mentioned the CIA fact book listing things like cars, phones, and clothes as their main exports.
Really? From this tiny little island nation?
It does seem surprising, doesn't it? But apparently the U.S. isn't a major trading partner for them.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense.
Yeah. And Tokelau is actually described as having one of the world's smallest economies. Their revenue comes from things like selling dried coconut, stamps, coins, and handicrafts, plus money sent back by people working overseas.
So it seems like the U.S. tariff is kind of like swatting a fly with a sledgehammer.
That's a good way to put it. Given the scale of their economy and their limited trade with the U.S., the impact of the tariff on Tokelau itself is probably pretty small. But it does raise the question of why they were even included on the list in the first place.
Right. It's like, what's the point?
Exactly. Okay, ready for the grand finale.
Bringing it on.
This one's the Cocos Keeling Islands. Another set of Australian islands, 27 of them this time. Small population, focus on farming and tourism. They got a 10% tariff. But their U.S. imports in 2024 were actually pretty significant, $1.1 million.
Oh, wow. That's way more than the others.
Yeah, and most of it was goods returned, followed by computer and transportation equipment.
Okay, but they do export some stuff, right?
They do. CBC mentioned the CIA fact book, which states that 31% of their exports go to the U.S., and those exports are ships.
Ah, so there's a real trade connection there, at least in the shipping industry.
Exactly. The higher import value could be because of ships being returned for maintenance or something like that.
Makes sense.
Okay, so we've gone through this whole list of far-flung places, from penguin havens to military bases to tiny tropical islands. But the big question remains, why? Why are these places even on the tariff list in the first place?
Yeah, that's what I want to know.
Well, the BBC mentioned an Axios report where a White House official suggested that it's because they're all Australian territories.
Ah, so maybe it's just a case of guilt by association.
Could be. And CBC quoted the Australian trade minister who straight up called it clearly a mistake.
Yeah, and then there's Prime Minister Albanese's comment, the one about nowhere on Earth is safe. That's kind of stuck with me.
It's a good one, isn't it? Kind of sums up the whole situation. So it seems like the Australian connection might be the key here.
Yeah.
These territories, Heard and McDonald Islands, Norfolk Island, Cocos, Keeling Islands, they're all linked to Australia in some way.
Right.
It's possible that the tariff policy was designed with a focus on larger nations, and these territories just got swept up in it without anyone really thinking about their individual trade relationships with the U.S. And remember that idea from The Guardian about mislabeled shipments? That could be a factor, too.
Yeah, so maybe it's partly data errors, partly just an oversight.
Exactly. But it does raise some questions about how these trade policies account for, the unique circumstances of dependent territories.
Yeah, it seems like they just got lumped in without much thought.
It does seem that way. Now, there's another thing that's been bugging me about this whole thing. The National Post article keeps using the phrase reciprocal tariffs. But a lot of these places don't actually export anything to the U.S.
Yeah, so how can it be reciprocal if there's no trade to begin with?
Exactly. That's my point. Reciprocal tariffs are usually a response to tariffs imposed by another country. It's like a back and forth thing, trying to pressure each other into reducing trade barriers.
Right, a tit for tat kind of thing.
Exactly. But in a lot of these cases, that underlying trade relationship just doesn't exist.
It's like trying to play tennis against a brick wall.
Yeah. So the whole reciprocal thing just doesn't really apply here. I think it shows that these policies are being applied in a very broad brush way without taking into account the nuances of global trade.
Yeah, it seems like they're not really thinking about the smaller players or the unintended consequences.
That's a good point. It highlights the need to be more thoughtful and precise when crafting these policies.
Totally agree. So we end up with this bizarre situation. Tariffs hitting places with more wildlife than people, military bases, and tiny island economies. And the reasons seem to range from administrative errors to just plain old data mistakes.
It's a pretty wild ride when you think about it.
It is. It's like a comedy of errors, but with global trade policy.
That's a great way to put it. But it does make you think about how interconnected the global economy really is, even reaching these far-flung corners of the world.
Yeah, no place is truly isolated anymore, even if it has more penguins than people.
That's true. And this whole thing really makes you wonder, what does this seemingly indiscriminate use of tariffs, even on places with almost no economic ties to the U.S., tell us about the state of global trade?
Yeah, what does it say about how countries are approaching trade these days?
And what are the unintended consequences of these broad measures?
Great questions. Definitely food for thought.
Absolutely. This is a story that, while seemingly absurd on the surface, actually reveals a lot about the complexities and sometimes the absurdities of the global trade system.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, folks, that's our deep dive into the world of tariffs on Penguin Islands and other unexpected places.
Thanks for joining us.
Hit subscribe and turn on notifications.